right, everybody. Welcome to the Route Consultant Weekly Webinar for the waste industry. My name is Josh Gregory, and I'm the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. If you've never seen us before, our team ran one of the largest FedEx operations in the country and has had a decade of experience valuing, selling, and consulting on all different kinds of logistics businesses. And so the goal of these webinars and these content is to help all of you understand the new opportunity we're talking about here in the waste industry and to help you understand what comes with owning one of these businesses. And so we're here for you to learn about the history, about the industry. If you're here live, you can always ask questions. And then if you decide it's interesting for you, we want you to be able to find the best way to accelerate your journey to that next step. Now, again, if you are here live, we do have a section at the bottom of the window for you to type in any questions. There's a Q&A button. If you're not here live, you're always free to come back afterwards, watch on YouTube, and send us these questions later, and we're always happy to help and direct you to the right path from there. Now, if you've only interacted with us on the FedEx side, if that's where you're coming from, there's a good chance you won't be as familiar with the thing that we're talking about today, because it's something you don't have to deal with on the FedEx side. But any other logistic industry is going to have to work through this and understand everything that comes with this. And I'm talking about getting a DOT number and dealing with DOT compliance. So we have brought Tommy Turbyville back on as well. He has his decades of experience in this industry, and we want to make sure that he's here to both talk you through how all of this works and what you need to know as you're getting into it. So Tommy, I see you there. Why don't you say hello and we'll get started.
Hey, Josh. Hey, everyone.
All right. And if Tommy's coming at you at a new location, it's because we snuck him in the office for the day. So Tommy, let's start with an easy one here. Just when we're talking through DOT compliance, what even is a DOT number? What am I talking about here?
Yeah, so the Department of Transportation requires commercial vehicles to be registered. There are, different requirements as far as number of people, weights, things of that sort. But all commercial vehicles need a DOT.
Yeah.
So if you're in business, you're a commercial vehicle.
That's right. And if you're coming from the FedEx side, you kind of get out of jail free card because you just operate under FedEx's DOT number and they handle a lot of the compliance. But that is still, a number that exists. It's on the side of all the vehicles. If you're a commercial vehicle, you got to have one. So when you're getting your own here, Tommy, is this something like, how hard is it to get a DOT number?
Well, you're dealing with federal government, so there's a lot of paperwork involved. And so really, it's just, when I say that, you just have to make sure when you fill out your application that you have all the information that they're going to ask you for. So you can do it online. When I say it's not difficult, there's just information. Make sure you do it right, answer the questions, and provide the information they ask.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. Now, you say there's a lot of process. How long do you kind of think that people should book in for how long it's going to take to get one of these?
Well, it's pretty amazing. Typically, you can get one within 2 weeks. And
Okay.
I will tell you, if you do it online, you're going to get it quicker than, of course, if you go through snail mail. So, but they say, could be as few as 2 days. I don't think that's very likely. But typically within 2 weeks, as long as you provide all the information, things go smooth, you'll get it.
Okay, so it's not a crazy amount of time, and I would imagine most people are going to do it online these days anyway. So that's good to know. It's even faster if you do it that way. So at least the impediment to a DOT is not getting it, but there are a lot of things that come with staying compliant. So before we get through some of those things, the way that you find out you're not compliant is through a DOT inspection most of the time. Is that something people should expect to happen every year, more often than that? Like, how does a DOT inspection happen?
Well, there are really not set standards that you can expect one every year. For the most part, DOT inspections are random unless you do something to trigger them to focus on them. And so, I mean, and that would be like if there is a random violation, they're like, hey, we're going to focus on, it could be industry specific. We're going to focus on a specific industry. And they see, every waste truck's going to get pulled over. And so those are just random on street inspections. And if they don't find anything there, I mean, your chances are you could be in business 15, 20 years and never have a audit per se. Inspection, yes. Audit, no.
Got it. Yeah, and we can talk about audits in a second, but yeah, so inspections can happen more frequently. Audits may never happen if you're lucky, right?
Right, right.
So, when we're talking about inspections, DOT compliance in general, what are the typical things that you've seen people get in trouble with when it comes to these inspections?
It's really two things. The most common in this industry is hours of service.
Hmm.
And the other is maintenance on your vehicles because of the requirements they have in that regard. Those are the two things that will cause you to get in trouble.
So when you say hours of service, is what are you talking about there? People working too much, or like how do they kind of check on that?
Yeah, so there are some very strict guidelines related to hours of service that they put together. And again, the thought process of that is you can't watch, hardly any TV without seeing an attorney saying something about a big truck. So uh so all of that came about. And so they put hours of service together. In the waste industry, you're typically within 150 air miles of your base. And so in that regard, a person can drive up to 14 hours a day. But with that, they have to have a 30-minute break at 8 hours.
Hmm.
And so that's one. So you look at it a couple of ways. One is the actual day, they can't work more than 14 hours. But the other one that so many people miss is 70 hours over 7 days or 80 hours over 8 days. And where most people make their mistake on that is they think of, 7 days as Monday through Sunday or Sunday through Saturday, but it is any 7 day period that they can look at. And so you think, well, I only work my guys 5 days a week. That's not a big issue. Well, they can start on a Wednesday. And if you have a terrible day on Wednesday and go for 7 days, you can be out of compliance. So it's any 7 day period or any 8 day period and not a work week or how you pay your people.
Yeah, yeah, and I can imagine that's how a lot of people just think of a week as either a calendar week or a pay period. But you're right. That is a big call out that when you're thinking through hours of service, it is any slice of 7 days in a row that they decide to take. And that's really important. And so it comes down to a couple of things we'll talk about in a little bit in terms of how important it is to keep track of this stuff. And I'd imagine a lot of these guys do not.
Yeah, very true.
Okay, so the second one you mentioned is maintenance. So, does the DOT require all trucks are perfect, or what are you talking about there?
Well, the big thing they are going to make sure they check on are things that are safety related.
Hmm.
Brakes, tires, mirrors. I mean, those are the big things, and of course, the weight of the truck. But when you're talking about that, you have to have your pre and post trip inspections. You have to have all the repairs. You have to maintain a record of all the repairs. You replace a mirror, you've got to have documentation that mirror was replaced and it was fixed. Because if somebody writes it up and says, "Hey, my mirror's broke," and it goes out the next day and there's not something that says that. So it is the paperwork aspect of maintenance, if you ever get into an audit. But there's also things that the driver needs to have with them. They've got to have their pre-trip. They have to be able to show how they're tracking their hours, those types of things that they have to have as well.
Got it. So it's it comes back to we can't have any vehicles on the road that aren't operating safely, and so it's typically something like if you had some kind of thing happen while you're out on the route that day, that's different than if you had something that is clearly they can point to, like tread depth on the tires or something like that that doesn't just happen overnight.
Right, right.
Got it. Okay, now one of the things you just mentioned was weight. How does that play into things?
Yeah, so anytime you travel on an interstate, you see weigh stations. Very typically, it's state lines, And so what you need to be aware of is if you are over 26,000 pounds, which most of these vehicles are, your truck has to pull over in these weigh stations. They're going to do it, and sometimes they just weigh and wave you on. Other times they'll inspect the truck, they'll inspect the driver's paperwork, those types of things. But you need to be aware of that. The other thing that a lot of people think is it makes no difference. Whatever I register the vehicle at is what that's going to be considered. So if you have a truck that has a GVWR of 28,000 pounds and you say, oh, well, when you go to get your license, I'm only going to license it at 25,000, that means nothing. Because what that means is it's what the GVWR, the gross vehicle weight rating, is from the manufacturer that determines your weight. It's the same way if you get one and you say, hey, I know I'm going to be overloaded. I've got a truck that's got, a 50,000 pound rating and I know sometimes it's overloaded. So I'm going to put 60 on it. It makes no difference. You're just going to pay a higher fee to get your tag, but it means absolutely nothing as it relates to DOT. It's totally the GVWR.
Okay. And these weigh stations, obviously you got to hit them. Like, is there any penalty if you drive past, or how do they even know? Is it just because they can tell in general how big a vehicle looks from sight? And so it looks like
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole lot of it. There's probably some that are marginal that they may chase down, some of the smaller trucks, but any of the big waste trucks, chances are, you're over that and you have to pull in and check.
So all those cops that are sitting at weigh stations are not waiting to catch speeders. They're just waiting to chase down anybody who misses.
Right. And they will do that. They
Yeah.
will do that.
Okay. And so when they're there, if there's some kind of thing that they find at a weigh station in one of these roadside checks that is a violation, can they pull your driver off the road? Like what can happen at one of those?
Yeah, they can render the driver or the vehicle out of service. Boom, right there. Which means your driver can't go anywhere, your vehicle's not going to go anywhere. And so, yes, if you go through one of those, they find something, it's a safety related issue, they'll put it out of service. And if that means you have to send somebody there to change the tires because your tread depth is too little, or you have to do that before the truck can move, they'll inspect it and let you go. Or if your driver doesn't have his DOT log, they can say you're out of service, boom, and you have to go get them and put somebody else on that, move the truck.
Have you had one of those happen where you had to go stop a route in the middle of the day?
I have, as it related to a maintenance issue, that felt the brakes were didn't have enough pad on them, and so I've had to do that and do brake jobs there before. But thankfully, I've never had anything with the driver himself being out of service. I take that back. I have had to run paperwork that he left at the office out there for him to be in compliance to move on.
Got it. Yeah. Is there anything different that they need to have in their vehicle? Like anything in particular to pass qualification standards there?
Well, not so much. Most of it is the paperwork you have at your office, but of course, they've got to have their CDL license. They have to have their pre-trip if they have to have a repair if it was something from yesterday, and they have to have some way of tracking their hours of service. Those are the things the driver has to have to do that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so beyond weigh stations, if you have, let's say it gets to the audit level and you actually have something where you're messed up on or you're failing at that level, what can happen to your business there?
Well, the biggest thing is the penalties and the fines.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, there's no rhyme or reason to how they come up to those that I've been able to figure out. I mean, it could literally be tens of thousands of dollars based on what they find in the severity of it. But the other thing that happens with that, I mean, that is the penalty. It could get to the point the first time they're not going to shut you down, but they could take if it's ongoing issues. But the way it becomes ongoing issues, when they find something, chances are you're going to start being scrutinized much more. And
Yeah.
so, that area where they're at, hey, we got this, big climb out of this issue with, ABC waste. So we need to be checking all their trucks, and they'll tell their guys that, and hey, every time they see a truck, they'll check to make sure you're doing what you said. So it's that scrutiny. The other thing is it can impact your safety rating, which your insurance company could get a hold of, because again, the government agency. And the other thing is, I mean, if you just have ongoing issues like that, it's the impact to your image as a company. I mean, it's going to have that type of impact.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, and it's one of those things you don't want to play around with. And obviously, there's people that try to skirt some of these regulations as much as they can and do the bare minimum or do just enough. But these type of things, there's fines, there's impact to your company. There's even the chance if it's bad enough, you lose your DOT number and your company can't operate. So there's all kinds of things that can come from trying to not keep up with this compliance, and none of it are good things. A driver pulled off the road and you lose all your revenue for that day. You lose the trust of any customers you were trying to deliver to that day. So it's obviously really important to build a program and a plan in your business to keep up with all of this. So I guess when you're thinking about DOT compliance and safety, what have you seen are kind of the right ways to build that into your company structure and culture?
Well, you have to make sure somebody is paying attention and they're accountable and responsible for it.
Yeah.
Because, outside of that, there are the DOT files that, the driver files that you have to have. And I mean, it's the app, the NVR, it's, the annual violations review, it's a copy of their driver's license, it's their medical certificate. That's something we hadn't really touched on. It's the drug screening. All of those types of things somebody has to own. And then aside from that, it's also all the maintenance records, because when they come, if they actually are doing an audit, they're going to pull maintenance records and files and all of those types of things. So it's a couple of things that are very important that I've learned through this. Is most people think, okay, I'll have a file on an employee, and they put everything in the employee file. You need to have a separate DOT qualification file for each employee and only keep what's required in that file.
Got it.
Again, just only what's in there, if there's any disciplinary records or anything like that, but it's make sure, because the other thing, it's easy to check and follow up when you do that. But I would also, the other thing I would tell you is there's technology out there now that does so much of this. If you don't have something technology wise for hours of service, these guys are keeping logbooks. That is a pain.
Yeah.
So use the technology. There is technology for DOT files. The type of technology, it gets a little more complex as it relates to maintenance, but pre-trip and post-trip can definitely be done electronically. There's a lot of companies out there that's just part of it. The maintenance may be a little different and it can be a little more complex. But two things. I know enough to be dangerous in this area. Okay. But I also knew enough to get somebody that I paid on staff to know this like the palm of their hand to make sure I don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so, that they can have, depending on the size of your operation, they may have some other responsibilities, but you need to have someone, if it's not you, that understands all of these requirements. They know what they are to make sure that you're clean in this regard, because if you ever have one, they're going to turn your world upside down for several days. But if everything's in order, it's going to shorten that time. They're going to leave you alone. You're not going to have the scrutiny, but somebody needs to know this, and somebody needs to be inspecting what you expect related to the files and the paperwork.
Yeah, I think that's huge because there's so many little things to pay attention to, so many regulations, and it's very easy if you know it's a thing to pay attention to, but it's not something you as the owner are strictly focused on, to just let it lapse, or to only be thinking about a couple of the things and miss a few others, and maybe you're not doing a good job of keeping up the records. There's plenty of people I know that this is in their skill set, and they're great at safety, they're great at these regulations, great at keeping with records. Not everybody is. And so if it's not you, this isn't, safety and DOT are one of those ways to really get in trouble with your business on the logistics side. So if it's not your skill set, if you're not using the right technology, make sure somebody on your team is. And Tommy, with all these documents, like, is this something that you have to keep everything you've ever done? Like, how long do you retain this type of stuff?
Most everything is like 3 years.
Yeah.
And so the thing I would tell you, for example, truck files, after 3 years, get rid of the old stuff. Again, so that's just part of the ongoing upkeep you need on all that. Keep it as long as you need it. Don't have 7 years worth of records on the truck in a maintenance file, because that gives them the opportunity to go back past that and look if the information's there. So again, it's purging the files, it's getting rid of old information. You have a guy that has a bad NVR, you've got to have 3 years history. Once that drops off, get rid of that old NVR. I mean, it's little things like that, that if you do ever have an audit, that just increases to force them to dig in other things. And so I've had some of those before. As soon as I've taken on an organization that didn't get to that point of getting all of that cleaned up yet, and end up with, an audit, because one thing we hadn't talked about, the most common thing that is going to force an audit on your company is a disgruntled employee. There have almost all of the audits I've ever been to has been because of a disgruntled employee. They can call and complain about hours of service. And again, if they do it and they get somebody's attention, they'll come and do an audit. They can complain, hey, they don't take care of their trucks, they don't do this, when it relates to those two things. But the majority of the audits I've gone through over the last 40 years has been a result of a disgruntled employee of some sort.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is not shocking to me at all. And I, a lot of these things, they typically are looking for a reason to start the process. And that is not surprising that it's the most common reason these get triggered. Okay. Yeah. And, with all of these, it's just something where you can't let it slide. You can't let it go. But I think that's great advice of knowing what the real timelines are for what they're looking for, and only keeping what you need, because you're right. There are things that, aren't going to help you in the audit. And if they're long enough time ago, or you don't need to retain them anymore for that audit, that's great. And in this business, what you're trying to do, anytime there's any of these types of audits, you're trying to present a very clean thing where they ask no questions. You're hoping that you provide the information and everything is very easy to understand, very easy to process, so that they don't have any of those clarifying questions that lead to a bunch more conversations that you probably don't want. And that's what, in general, I always coach people on around the audit is know the questions they'll ask, know the information you need, and provide the minimum amount of information that cohesively answers the question.
Yeah, and I like to tell folks, I would tell my team all the time, they're on a hunting expedition.
Mm-hmm.
If everything is in order where they don't have to ask a lot of questions, they open the file, everything's there. They're not hunting so much, they're just validating what you've already done, and that's their view on it. So, don't allow them to go on a hunting expedition. Give them the information they need to validate that you're doing things right. Makes it much easier.
Yeah, that's right. And the more of this that you can build good habits on early, the better off you'll be, because Man, is it exciting. And I think, Tommy, you've encountered this several times where you're coming into a business or working with a business where all of their information is fragmented, and maybe they're trying to put it together and make it something, where they haven't even had an audit yet, but they're just trying to make their business records firm again. And that is a nightmare of trying to assemble paper and kind of hearsay almost of like, oh, I think I had an accident back, 2 years ago, but I don't really have any records of it. Let me see if I can find a receipt. There's stuff like that it just, it's a nightmare to try to scramble and pull it back. So if you can just have really good habits early where you're putting it all in one place, whether it's a physical file or it's a software, so that no matter what, any kind of question, where it is probably one of the best things you can do for your overall business health and DOT compliance.
Yeah, I would tell you to go along with what you just said. If you haven't been doing this, start today.
Yeah.
Get everything and then work backwards, because if you let it continue to go while you're trying to clean up and don't change something, start today saying, as of today, I'm going to be in compliance. Because if you do that in 3 months from now, again, something happens and you do end up with an audit, that will look favorably to say, hey, I've recognized and this is what I've done. So you can see from this point forward, we're working on cleaning up the backspace.
Yeah, that's a great point, because a lot of times what they're going to say in an audit is, hey, these are the problems, the areas that you did not do a good job of keeping records. So if you can kind of proactively say, I've already identified that problem, I've already made the change, here's a great, I've already, here's 3 months to show that I've done it really well and I'm going to continue to do it. That also answers a lot of worries and questions there. You're right, for sure. Perfect. Well, I think, Tommy, that's really what I wanted to cover on this for people who don't really understand DOT compliance and really how it applies to this space, and what you need to be aware of, what you see working, what you see don't. So I appreciate everything you provided there. For everybody who's here, if you're looking for other ways to engage with us, we have a bunch of digital content and ways that you can just go onto our website, learn for free. But what I'd really like to do is, if you're trying to find ways to talk to us more, we have workshops in person in our office every other month that are designed to really invest in you and teach you a lot about the industry and help you really feel comfortable about where this industry is going and if it's the right fit for you or not, and ways for you to engage with both myself and Tommy. We also have our big contractor expo coming up in a couple of months now, August 2nd through 4th in Dallas. It is completely free to attend. All food and drink are provided. All you got to do is make sure you find a way to get out here, grab a hotel room. But it is a time where you'll learn all about this industry and have a chance to meet with people from across the country. So if you are watching this now and it isn't August yet, you still got time to register. And then for everybody else, Tommy, thank you for being here. And for everybody who's always on here, thanks for joining, and we will see you all next week.